A heavy serving tray crashed against the hall floor, sending tin cups spinning beneath the tables. Clara Bennett froze beside the stove, one hand still wrapped around a ladle. At 37, she had learned not to flinch when people stared at her oversized body, but the laughter that followed was harder to ignore. Someone near the door muttered the old word again, barren, soft enough to deny it, yet loud enough to wound. Clara bent, gathered the cups, and returned to work. She had cooked every pot of beef stew, kneaded every loaf of bread, and baked the cinnamon apples cooling near the window. Still, when the Saturday supper began, no one saved her a place. The danger was not hunger. It was the slow cruelty of a town that had repeated a rumor so often that even Clara had begun believing she deserved the empty chair beside her. And nobody in Cotton Creek knew whether the rumor had ever been true. She served the ranch hands first, then the shopkeepers, the widows, and the men from the livery. Only after every plate was full did she take a small portion for herself. She crossed the crowded hall while conversations tightened around her, then lowered herself at the little table in the far corner. 2 chairs stood there. One had not been used in years. That was when the front door opened and Ethan Walker stepped inside. He was 46, newly arrived from Wyoming, and still carried the quiet watchfulness of a man measuring unfamiliar ground. The town had invited the new owner of Willow Ridge Ranch to supper, eager to learn how much land he had purchased and how much money he had brought with him. Ethan answered their greetings politely, accepted a plate, and looked across the room. Every table was crowded except Clara's. He noticed the flower on her sleeve, the burn mark near her wrist, and the way she kept her eyes on her stew while eating as though taking up even that small corner required an apology. He also noticed that everyone was eating the food she had prepared while pretending the woman who made it was not there. If you have ever watched a whole room choose not to see someone, then you know silence can be crueler than an insult. A rancher near Ethan pulled out a chair. "Plenty of room over here, Walker." Ethan thanked him, but did not sit. He carried his plate past the banker, the blacksmith, and the women gathered near the stove. One conversation after another faded as his boots crossed the wooden floor. Clara felt the silence spreading and tightened her fingers around her spoon. She expected another joke, another warning, or perhaps someone telling the stranger why he should keep walking. Instead, Ethan stopped beside the unused chair. He rested one hand on its back and gave her a courteous smile. "May I sit with you?" Clara stared at him as though he had spoken words she no longer understood. Behind him, the entire hall went silent. Clara looked from Ethan's face to the empty chair, waiting for someone to laugh and reveal the question as another cruel performance. No one did. Ethan remained standing, his plate balanced in one hand, his manner patient but certain. At last, Clara gave a small nod. He pulled the chair back without scraping it across the floor, sat across from her, and unfolded his napkin as calmly as though they had shared Saturday supper for years. For several moments, Clara could not lift her spoon. She felt every eye in the hall pressing against the side of her face. Ethan seemed aware of the attention, but he gave it no importance. He tasted the beef stew, paused, and took another bite. That may be the finest stew I've had since leaving Wyoming, he said. Clara lowered her eyes. You needn't flatter me, Mr. Walker. Ethan broke a piece from his bread. I don't flatter cooks. A man who lies about food deserves whatever he gets at the next meal. The corner of Clara's mouth moved before she could stop it. Ethan noticed but did not make the mistake of calling attention to it. Instead, he asked about the herbs in the stew and whether she had used cider in the gravy. Clara answered cautiously at first. Then he asked why the crust on her bread stayed soft after cooling, and her voice grew steadier. She explained how she brushed the loaves with butter while they were still warm and covered them with linen. For a few minutes, she forgot the silent room around them. She was no longer the woman people whispered about. She was simply a baker discussing bread with a man who genuinely wanted to understand it. When the meal ended, Ethan carried both plates to the kitchen. Clara followed quickly. You don't have to do that. He set them beside the wash basin. At Willow Ridge, I eat with the men who work beside me, and every man carries his own plate. Clara glanced toward the hall, where several townspeople were still watching. Cotton Creek has its own ways. Ethan looked through the doorway at the crowded tables. So I've noticed. His voice held no anger, but something in his expression told her he had also noticed the cruelty those ways permitted. Before leaving, Ethan bought the last apple pie on the cooling shelf. Clara wrapped it in brown paper and tied the string twice because her hands would not remain still. That pie is large enough for 6 men, she warned him. Then my foreman will have to learn generosity. Ethan placed the coins on the counter and added, I'll return the tin. Clara almost told him he did not need to come back. Instead, she watched him walk into the darkness, carrying the pie as carefully as another man might carry something precious. He returned Monday morning before sunrise. Clara was lifting fresh loaves from the brick oven when the bakery door opened and cold air moved across the flour-dusted floor. Ethan stepped inside with the empty pie tin beneath his arm. Your foreman enjoy it? She asked. He tried to hide the last piece in his bunkhouse. Ethan placed the tin on the counter. There was nearly a rebellion. Clara laughed, a brief, surprised sound that seemed to startle her more than him. Ethan ordered 1 loaf of bread, 2 slices of apple pie, and a pot of coffee. When she wrapped the bread, he pointed toward the small table near the kitchen. I thought I might eat the pie here unless the chair is spoken for. After that, he came most mornings. Sometimes he arrived with mud on his boots after checking the north pasture. Sometimes he carried fencing measurements or a list of supplies from the mercantile. He always removed his hat, wiped his boots, and asked before sitting. Clara began setting aside a heel of warm bread because he preferred it to the center slices. Ethan learned that she added cinnamon to the apples only after they had softened, and Clara learned he had spent 18 years building a cattle operation in Wyoming before selling it and coming north. He did not explain why a successful man had left everything familiar behind, and she did not ask. His silence around the subject felt less like secrecy than an old gate he was not ready to open. Their conversations lengthened by minutes. Ethan told her about a stubborn cow that had chased 3 ranch hands onto a water trough. Clara described the year a windstorm had torn the hall roof loose while 40 pies were baking. He asked her opinion on feeding 20 ranch workers during branding season. She recommended thick stew, cornbread, beans, and food that remained warm when men arrived late. Ethan wrote down every suggestion. "Would you consider cooking the branding supper?" he asked. Clara's hands stopped over the dough. No ranch owner had asked for her judgment before. They had asked only what she charged. "You trust me to feed all those men?" Ethan answered, "I trust the woman whose empty pie tin almost caused violence at Willow Ridge." By the third week, Clara found herself listening for his horse each morning. She hated that she listened. Hope had become dangerous to her long before Ethan arrived. Kindness could be withdrawn, and public kindness could become public humiliation. Yet he never behaved as though he were rescuing her. He simply ate what she cooked, listened when she spoke, and treated her chair as though sitting beside her required no courage at all. One Thursday afternoon, while Ethan was at the ranch, Clara carried flour sacks into the hall pantry and heard voices beyond the half-closed kitchen door. 3 members of the supper committee were speaking in low, urgent tones. One woman said Ethan Walker's visits were encouraging Clara to forget her place. Another said respectable families might stop attending Saturday meals if the new rancher continued making a spectacle of himself. Then the committee chairman spoke the words that turned Clara's hands cold around the flour sack. "If this continues, we may need someone else to run the kitchen." Clara remained in the pantry until the committee members left. The flour sack pressed against her chest, heavy enough to make her arms ache, but she hardly felt it. She had kept that kitchen running through winter shortages, broken ovens, cattle drives, and funerals. She had fed the same people who now spoke of replacing her as though she were a stained tablecloth. By the time she stepped into the empty hall, her face was calm. Only the flour scattered across the floor showed where her hands had begun to shake. The following morning, Ethan knew something was wrong before Clara spoke. His usual place had not been set. No heel of warm bread waited beside the coffee pot, and she kept her back toward him while cutting dough. When he asked whether she was ill, Clara said the supper committee might hire another cook. She tried to make it sound like ordinary business. Ethan listened without interrupting. "Did they give a reason?" he asked. Clara pressed the knife harder through the dough. "They believe your visits are creating discomfort." Ethan looked around the quiet bakery. "My eating breakfast creates discomfort?" Clara finally faced him. "Not the eating, the company." Ethan removed his coat and placed it over the chair. "Then their discomfort belongs to them." Clara shook her head. "You can say that because you're new here. You own land. People want your business." She wiped flour from her fingers, though there was more on her palms than before. "I have this kitchen because the town allows me to have it." Ethan's expression hardened. "You have this kitchen because you earned it." Clara answered softly, "Those are not always the same thing." That evening, Ethan attended the committee meeting at the town hall. He did not raise his voice or accuse anyone of cruelty. He simply asked whether complaints had been made about Clara's food, cleanliness, prices, or work. The chairman admitted there had been none. Ethan then asked whether the kitchen books were short. They were not. The bakery had earned enough to repair the hall roof and purchase a new stove. When Ethan asked what rule Clara had broken, no one could name one. At last, one committee woman said, "Mr. Walker, Certain reputations affect respectable gatherings. Ethan rested both hands on the table. A reputation built on proof may deserve consideration. A reputation built on whispers deserves burial. The woman's mouth tightened. You do not know her history. Ethan replied, Neither do you. That appears to be the problem. He informed the committee that Willow Ridge Ranch would no longer purchase bread, pies, or supper supplies through the town hall if Clara lost the kitchen for reasons unrelated to her work. Several merchants depended upon the ranch account. The chairman cleared his throat and announced that no decision would be made that evening. Clara was furious when she learned what Ethan had done. I never asked you to threaten them. She stood behind the bakery counter with her arms folded, her face flushed beneath the heat of the ovens. Ethan remained near the door. I didn't threaten anyone. I told them where I would spend my money. Clara looked away. Now they'll say I used you. Ethan stepped closer, but stopped before entering the space she guarded around herself. They have been saying things about you for years. You cannot build your life around keeping cruel people from finding a new sentence. His words struck deeper than he intended. Clara turned toward the work table and began kneading dough with unnecessary force. You think I haven't tried ignoring them? She asked. I was 24 when I married Samuel Bennett. He died 7 years later after a winter fever. We never spoke publicly about why we had no family. It was no one's concern. She folded, though, and drove both palms into it. After he was buried, the questions became whispers. The whispers became certainty. Before long, people spoke as though they had stood inside our home and counted every private sorrow. Ethan said nothing. Clara's voice lowered. No doctor ever told me anything. Samuel never blamed me. We simply had the life we had. But the town needed a reason to explain it, and they chose me. Her hands slowed. At first, I knew they were wrong to judge. Then I began sitting farther from everyone. I stopped accepting invitations. I stopped wearing the blue dress Samuel liked because women stared at me whenever I tried to look happy. She pressed her fingers into the dough. Finally, I believed what they had been teaching me, that a woman who could not give a man the life people expected had no right to ask for another one. Ethan crossed the room and stood on the opposite side of the table. Between them lay the unfinished bread. Clara, I did not come to Montana looking for the life other people expected. For the first time, he spoke about Wyoming. He had owned a prosperous spread there, but success had turned every meal into a negotiation. Neighbors measured his cattle. Businessmen measured his land. Women introduced to him by friends seemed to measure the security of his name. After 18 years, Ethan had sold the ranch because he no longer knew whether anyone sat at his table for the man or the property. I came here to begin again, he said, not to let another town tell me whom I may respect. Clara looked at him across the flour-covered table. The anger had left her face, replaced by something more frightened. Respect is not the same as love. Ethan held her gaze. No. But anything worthy of being called love ought to begin there. The next Saturday, Ethan hosted supper at Willow Ridge Ranch. He invited his workers, the merchants of Cotton Creek, the supper committee, and anyone willing to ride the 5 miles beyond town. Clara agreed to prepare the meal only after Ethan promised she would be paid openly and fairly. Together they planned kettles of beef stew, trays of roasted potatoes, 12 loaves of bread, and 6 cinnamon apple pies. Ethan's ranch hands carried tables into the main barn and placed the chairs without separate sections for owners, workers, widows, or officials. When the meal began, people instinctively gathered beside those they already knew. Ethan stopped them before they sat. "At Willow Ridge we mix the tables," he said. "A man learns little by eating only beside those who agree with him." His workers moved first, making room for shopkeepers and ranch wives. Some townspeople obeyed reluctantly. Clara remained near the serving boards, filling bowls and pretending she had no intention of eating. Ethan carried 2 plates to the center table. Before the entire gathering, he pulled out the chair beside him. Clara hesitated as the old silence returned, the same silence that had filled the town hall when he first approached her corner. Ethan waited. He did not command her, touch her, or turn the moment into a performance. He simply kept the chair open until Clara crossed the barn and sat down. After everyone had tasted the meal, Ethan lifted a piece of bread. "The finest thing served tonight is not this loaf," he said. His eyes moved to Clara. "It is the person who rose before daylight to make it, who has fed this town for years, and who deserved a place at its tables long before I arrived." No one applauded at first. Then Ethan's foreman raised his coffee cup. A blacksmith followed. Within moments, chairs shifted as people made space rather than guarding it. Clara smiled, but the warmth of the evening could not silence every wound. After the last wagon left, she found a folded paper beneath the bakery account book. A merchant from Helena had heard the hall might lose its cook. He was offering to purchase Clara's ovens, recipes, and bakery lease. For the first time in years, Clara had enough money to leave Cotton Creek behind. The offer from Helena remained on Clara's work table all night. By dawn, flour dust had settled across the folded paper, but the words beneath it had not changed. The merchant would buy her ovens, recipes, lease, and supplies for more money than Clara had ever held at one time. He would send a wagon Monday morning. She would be free of Cotton Creek before the next Saturday supper. Clara told herself that leaving was practical. Helena offered more customers, better equipment, and a room above the new shop. No one there would know the name Cotton Creek had given her. Yet as she packed her recipe books, every page seemed tied to the life she meant to escape. Samuel's handwriting marked the beef stew he had once called too peppery. An apple stain covered her first pie recipe. In the back, she found the date Ethan Walker had begun buying 1 loaf, 1 slice of pie, and 1 pot of coffee each morning. When Ethan entered the bakery that Saturday, the shelves were half empty. Copper pans had been stacked in flour crates. The blue curtains were down, and Clara stood behind the counter wearing her traveling dress. "What happened?" Ethan asked. "I accepted the offer from Helena." He looked at the packed room, then at the paper beneath her hand. "When do you leave?" "Monday." "Is Helena where you want to be?" Clara folded the paper. "It is where I can work without every meal becoming a test of whether people will sit near me." "That was not my question." "It is the answer I have." Ethan moved to his usual table but did not sit. "If you want a larger bakery and a different life, I will help load the wagon myself." But if you are leaving because this town taught you to be ashamed, Helena will not be far enough. Shame travels in the same trunk as the person carrying it. Clara's eyes flashed. What? You make it sound simple because no one spent 13 years deciding what kind of man you are by what your marriage did not produce. No, Ethan said. They spent 18 years deciding what kind of man I was by how many cattle I owned. That is not the same. No. He accepted the correction. I could sell land and become less valuable to them. They made you believe there was something you could never change. He rested a hand on the empty chair. I won't pretend I know that wound. I only know I do not want their lie choosing your road. Clara turned away. The rumor will never disappear. Maybe not. She looked back. But you will not face it alone unless you decide you want to. The words frightened her more than a promise of rescue. Rescue asked for gratitude. Ethan asked for choice. He offered companionship without demanding that she stay. Before she could answer, the town hall bell rang 3 times. People were crossing the street toward the hall, ranch hands, merchants, women carrying dishes, and men from the livery. Clara stiffened. What have you done? Nothing today. The supper committee had called a public meeting after learning about the Helena offer. The hall was crowded when Clara entered. She nearly turned around. Ethan walked beside her but did not touch her arm. After a long breath, she crossed to the corner where she had eaten alone for years. The chairman stood near the stove with the bakery accounts open. He admitted the hall could not afford to lose Clara's income. Her bread and suppers had paid for roof repairs, winter coal, and maintenance. He spoke first of money because money was easier than remorse. Then he offered Clara a new 5-year kitchen lease. Clara did not move. Would you offer it if Willow Ridge did not buy half its bread from me? The chairman reddened. The ranch account is important, so the food is welcome. The woman who makes it remains negotiable. A murmur passed through the room. The chairman looked toward Ethan as though expecting him to settle the matter. Ethan stayed beside the wall. This was Clara's work and Clara's decision. He would not turn her defense into another man's performance. The committee woman who had spoken of respectable gatherings rose. Mrs. Bennett, people have concerns. You cannot expect years of belief to change because Mr. Walker has taken an interest. Clara flinched. The phrase made Ethan's respect sound like curiosity. She reached into her pocket for the signed Helena agreement. Then Ethan's foreman stood. I have eaten Mrs. Bennett's food near every day since Mr. Walker took Willow Ridge. Never once did a loaf ask whether I was respectable enough to cut it. A few men laughed, but he did not. When one of our hands broke his ankle, she sent stew for a week and took no payment. Maybe the question is not whether she belongs at our tables. Maybe it is whether we behaved well enough to belong at hers. The room quieted. The blacksmith admitted Clara had fed him on credit during a lean winter. A seamstress said Clara had left bread at her door without attaching a name. The livery owner remembered nights when Clara kept the stove burning for stranded adult travelers. None erased the years of whispers. Together they revealed that Cotton Creek had accepted Clara's kindness while withholding its own. A ranch wife crossed to the corner, lifted the unused chair, and carried it toward the center table. Another woman shifted aside to make room. The gesture was awkward and years late, but Clara watched it with a pain that was almost hope. For one breath, she imagined the next Saturday, setting down her own plate before the food went cold, hearing someone ask about her morning instead of her pies, no longer waiting for permission to belong. Then she remembered how quickly a chair could be pulled away when the room changed its mind. The committee woman tightened her gloves. Kindness does not answer every concern. Ethan stepped away from the wall. What concern? She hesitated. He waited. The word grew uglier when she had to place it before Clara's face. People say she is barren. People say, Ethan repeated. Which doctor? No answer. Which record? Silence. Who was invited into the Bennett marriage and given the right to report on it? The woman lowered her eyes. Ethan's voice remained level. Then you have no concern. You have a rumor and years of practice using it. For one moment, it seemed the meeting might end there, uncomfortable and too weak to change anything. Then the woman said, If Mrs. Bennett remains, I resign. Two committee members stood beside her. One had eaten Clara's cinnamon pie at every harvest supper for 11 years. He would not meet her eyes. That small cowardice hurt more than the resignation itself, because it proved how easily gratitude could sit beside contempt without ever challenging it. Clara's hand tightened around the Helena agreement. There was the truth Ethan's courage could not erase. Not everyone would change. The town could offer a lease today and punish her tomorrow. She placed the signed paper on the table. I accept Helena's offer. The words struck Ethan harder than he showed. His foreman began to object, but Ethan lifted a hand. Clara had been controlled by public judgment for too long. He would not control her with public affection. The chairman asked whether she was certain. No, Clara answered, but I'm tired. She left before anyone could persuade her. Ethan followed only as far as the bakery porch. Do you want company? He asked. Clara shook her head. Then I will see you tomorrow morning. The bakery is closed tomorrow. I did not say I was coming to buy bread. She went inside and locked the door. That night, Clara packed until the lamps burned low. Near midnight, she found two mismatched cups behind a flour bin, the cups she and Ethan used each morning. She sat on the floor holding them, grieving not the town she meant to leave, but the ordinary life she had barely allowed herself to imagine. Before sunrise, hoofbeats stopped outside. Clara remained upstairs until the smell of coffee and warming bread reached her. She descended, ready to protest. Ethan stood beside the work table. He had obtained the spare key from the hall chairman, brought a loaf from Willow Ridge, and scorched one side of it. Two plates waited on the table. Two cups steamed beside them. He had cut the bread unevenly and spread too much butter across both portions. Clara stared. You broke into my bakery. I used a key. That is a polite form of breaking in. I hoped the coffee might improve my defense. She almost smiled. Then she saw the second chair drawn out for her. Ethan did not mention Helena or ask her to tear up the agreement. He rested his hand on the chair and said, I don't want you to eat alone anymore. Years of practiced silence broke inside her. Clara covered her mouth, but tears came before she could turn away. Ethan remained where he was, close enough to stay and far enough not to claim what she had not offered. After a long moment, Clara crossed the room. She sat down beside him. Clara did not promise to remain in Cotton Creek that morning. She drank Ethan's bitter coffee, ate the scorched bread, and listened while the bakery slowly warmed around them. Even after she stopped crying, one fear remained. Whenever footsteps sounded on the porch, her shoulders tightened. She still expected someone to enter, see Ethan beside her, and remind them both that the town had not given its permission. Ethan noticed, but he did not ask her to be fearless. He simply poured more coffee. "People have spent years looking at you through a rumor," he said. "I have watched you through every meal you served, every loaf you shaped, and every kindness you gave to people who offered little in return." He reached across the table, stopping before his hand touched hers. "I see a woman with more courage than anyone in that hall." Clara looked at his waiting hand. "And if I leave, I will help you load the wagon. And if I stay, I will be here tomorrow morning." She placed her hand in his. Ethan's fingers closed gently around hers. "If you are willing, I would like to be the man who sits beside you at every meal left to us." He glanced at the uneven bread between them. "Though I hope you will continue doing most of the baking." Clara laughed through the last of her tears. Then she told him she did not want Helena. She wanted the right to remain without apologizing for taking up space. She wanted her ovens, her recipes, and the small table where someone had finally asked before sitting down. The agreement with Helena was canceled that afternoon. Clara returned the advance and kept the bakery. She did not stay because every heart in Cotton Creek had changed. Some people still whispered. Some crossed the street rather than greet her. On difficult mornings, Clara still stored an extra piece of bread in a cloth, an old habit from years when comfort never felt certain. Each time Ethan found it, he added another slice and placed the bundle beside her coffee. He never mocked the fear. He answered it with abundance until, little by little, she stopped preparing for every good thing to disappear. Ethan courted her without spectacle. He repaired the loose bakery step, carried flour without being asked, and learned to peel apples so slowly that Clara threatened to charge him by the hour. During branding season, she cooked at Willow Ridge, where Ethan kept his habit of eating beside his workers. He always saved the chair at his right for her. Months later, they exchanged vows in the same town hall where Clara had once eaten alone. There were no grand speeches. Ethan only promised that no rumor would decide who sat at their table. Clara promised to keep him away from any bread dough that required skill. 1 year after Ethan first entered Cotton Creek, a new wooden sign hung above the bakery door. Walker and Bennett Bakery. The shop became the busiest gathering place in town, but Clara made one rule more important than profit. No table would be reserved for wealth, rank, or reputation. Any adult traveler who entered alone was welcomed by name and offered a place near someone else. The small corner table remained, but both chairs were always pulled out. Clara still heard the old word once in a while. It no longer carried the power it once had. She had learned that the truth of a person's life could not be measured by what strangers assumed was missing. Her life held warm bread before sunrise, Ethan's boots beside the stove, laughter over ruined apple peelings, and 2 cups waiting each morning. It was not the life Cotton Creek had expected for her. It was the life she had finally chosen for herself. Years later, An adult traveler pointed toward the corner and asked Clara why the little table seemed older than the others. Clara looked across the bakery at Ethan, now silver at the temples, pouring coffee for a tired ranch hand. That table once belonged to a woman who believed she would have to eat alone for the rest of her life, Clara said. Ethan carried a hot loaf toward her and set it between the two plates. Good thing she let me sit down, he said. Clara smiled as morning light spread across the table, where the empty chair had once seemed permanent. Sometimes a life begins to heal when one person refuses to believe the cruelest story told about another. If this story reminded you that respect can begin with something as simple as pulling out a chair, right, may I sit with you, in the comments, and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe for more frontier stories where kindness still has a place at the table.